Hello and welcome to another tip video here from Zenatta Consulting. My name is Tyler Colts, and in this video, we're going to be doing a more advanced walkthrough of the new Kiosk Studio functionality for Zoho CRM. So if you remember and you follow our channel, a couple weeks back, we released our first video on Kiosk, which was a kind of simple overview of some of the big picture parts and pieces of the new feature. In this case, we're going to get a little bit more granular. And what we're going to do is set up a kiosk that will run on the home page of the CRM that will allow a user to easily add a deal to a particular account and contact and kind of enter them into our pipeline. So before we jump in, I do want to ask if you find this video useful, please be sure to like and subscribe down below. And please also leave any feedback, questions, or video requests down in the comments section below, as we do try to read and respond to each and every one of those. So without any further ado, let us jump right on into the walkthrough. So to get started here, we are looking at the CRM, and I'm going to give you a quick overview of just the records that we're going to use as an example here to go through. So we've set up an account called Zenatta Consulting, and under this account, we have 2 contacts. And so what we're going to do is set up a kiosk where from this homepage, a user can search for an account, select that account, choose from the contacts within that account to define the primary stakeholder for this deal, enter some information about that deal, and then actually have the system create that deal for the user. So to get started, what we're going to do is jump on into our settings and go into Kiosk Studio. Again, just as a quick reminder, really what's unique about the kiosk is that it is a process that runs independent of a record, right? So dissimilar to a blueprint, which triggers for like a particular deal, the kiosk can run independent of any particular record. Now you can search for data and even select data throughout the course of your kiosk process, but you don't have to start from a particular record, which is why we're allowed to use it on the homepage. So we'll jump in and get started here, and we'll call this the Add to Pipeline kiosk, and we'll drop right into our page. So again, if you saw our previous video, you'll remember that in that case, I selected a current record and I picked leads because in that case, we wanted the process to run for the outreach for a particular lead. Now, in this case, it's a little bit different because we are not running this for one record. We're starting it independently of a record on the homepage. So we're not going to select a current record. Instead, we're going to jump right on into the kiosk flow. We're going to click the plus here and add our first screen. In this case, we're going to search for your account. So what we'll do is we'll add, and I always like to have a display element. So what I like to type here is just a quick little description of what we want the user to do on this page. So I'm going to type that, and then we'll be right back. So I've added our little bit of display text here. Essentially, the first thing the user is going to do as part of this flow is search for an account. Now we're going to do a contained search, which I'll show you when we get to that section. So I'm going to let the user know that, hey, if you don't know the full name, enter what you do know, and the system will try its best to run the search for you. So then here, we'll go ahead and add a single line value. And this single line we will call the account name. And so this first step will essentially be the user selecting or searching for a particular account based on that name. And here is where they will enter it. Now, the next step after they have entered that account name to the best of their knowledge, we will run a search records for them or a get records. And here we'll have them select their account, and then we'll run a get records for them. So here we'll set up a new get records value. We'll call this search for account. We will get records from that account. And then here's where we can do some of the interesting things here, where we can have it search where the account name contains a particular field. And so this field could be like from the user record in some cases, that's going to be pretty rare. Or in our case, this will be the account name value from this search for your account. Now, a couple options here. You can have this select from a single record or multiple records. In our case, I'm going to do multiple. You could have cases where maybe you have like Zenatta as some holdings company, and then they have Zenatta IT, Zenatta Zoho Consulting, etc. So we'll do multiple records, and then we're going to limit them to selecting one, right? Because we don't want to create a deal for 2 accounts, just the one. Then last but not least, we can actually have it, we can define what we want it to show when we actually find the particular account. So I'll just pick the account name and the account type. and then I will save. So now at this point, so far in the process, what we've done is ask the user to enter in the account name that they'd like to search for, and then we have searched for that account. The next thing that we want to do is actually have that user select from a contact inside of this account. So here we can do another screen. We'll say select your contact, and we'll do a new get records. So you can actually reuse get records that you've already created. In this case, it's going to be a pretty different flow. So we'll call this select your contact. We'll get records from the contacts module. And then here, what we want to do is actually select from a filter based on what we've found or chosen in that previous step, right? So we can actually see that now that we've run that search for account action, we can now use those fields in our next steps when we're actually going to now search for contacts. So what this will essentially do is show us the list of the contacts that are a part of the account that we've just selected. This is again where it's important that we have that selection limit at 1 on the previous step when we're actually choosing an account. Because if you allowed the user to pick 2 accounts, even if they did it on accident, this step will fail, right? Because it does not know which account it is that it should do this search for. So now what we can do is actually have it choose from those contacts. Maybe we'll show the first, the last, and the email, and then we'll allow the user to select one of the contacts that the system can find. And so that's all that we'll need at this step, and we'll go ahead and click done. And so now that we've set up these first few steps, one thing I do always like to do is just run tests as I'm going through the process. Always good to test as you go, especially as you're building more complicated flows, just to make sure that you're not missing anything along the way. So if we click up here in the top right to do a test run, we can see exactly what this kiosk is going to look like when it's live. So we're starting on this search for your account page. Now here, I do want to show, if we remember that when we originally had our account, the name of that account was Zenatta Consulting, right? But because we're doing a contained search, the user doesn't have to perfectly get it right. So even if the user was just to search for Zenatta, it's still going to show that account because Zenatta is contained within that account name. So we can then select that account and click done. Now the next step here, we'll see it's allowing us to select a contact, but those contacts are filtered based on what we have here connected to the account that we've chosen, which is exactly what we want to have happen here. So next, I'll choose my contact and click done. System will let us know, hey, you've chosen one, you can't choose any more. And then it would allow us to move on to that next step. So as we're looking at it so far, all looks good. We have the data that we need. It's doing the searches correctly. It's doing all the filtering that we'd like to have it do. So the next step is actually prompting the user to enter the relevant information about that deal. So if we go ahead and go to the account, let's look at what fields we have on a deal that we might want to capture as part of this flow. We can see, hey, we've got a deal name and a closing date, so we're going to have those at some point. Now, I'm going to show you that the deal name, you don't actually have to have the user type that in. We can set it for them, but we will ask them to fill out a closing date. We'll also ask them to fill out some of this discovery information. So the budget, the required completion date of the customer, and the type of service that we are looking to provide for that particular client. And so I'm going to keep this page up over here on the side so that we can refer to it as we move forward in the flow. So as a next step, just as a reminder, we've got our account, we've got our contact. So now it's time to actually create our deal. And so we'll do another screen and we'll say enter. Oops, sorry, I got all caps on there. Don't want to be yelling at our team with all caps. So we'll say enter our deal information. And now here is where we're going to skip over the display elements, right? Because these are mostly things that are going to be shown to the user. Now we want to actually have them enter in some data. So given that we have an account and a contact already selected, we don't need to worry about that. I'll show you why later. So we really just need to make fields that will match up to the values that we want the user to have to create in this case. So what we can do is start to enter those in. So let's look at our date field, and maybe we want to add an estimated closing date. Now here we don't need to merge from module. The only fields that would be available if we were to try to merge would be from those like selected values, right? The contacts and the accounts, but we don't need any of that data for this. We're actually asking the user to fill it in. So we can do our estimated closing date. We can do our budget. customer budget. We can do our required completion date. We can also add our service type, which will be an important one here. We'll do that as a pick list. Now, pretty important whenever we're adding pick list values, just to make sure that we perfectly match these. The system will actually allow it to come in if it's not a perfect match, but as a best practice, we want to make sure that we have that in place. So for our service type, we will add new build or renovation. And so as we look at the deal, we've now got a field for closing date, budget, required completion date, and service type. So we're looking good there. Again, deal name, I'm going to have the system fill in for us based on a little formula in our script. So we are actually looking good here. Now, in this case, I'm going to actually mark all of these as mandatory because I want to make sure that the user enters these in. In your case, you might say, hey, some of these are nice to haves, not need to haves. But for me, I'm going to go ahead and just make sure that we have all of the data that we may need as part of this process. And so now that we've actually set up that screen where the user is going to be able to enter in all of the relevant information about the deal, we can go ahead and actually create a record using that information. And so we're going to create a deal here. Now, a couple things to be aware of under actions. So you do have a variety of different actions. A lot of these really work best if you have that like current record selected, right? And we know that we're running this for like a specific lead or a specific record in general. You can also do a create record action, and I'll show you that real quick. I'm going to show you this as a demo. We're going to do it with a function, but we'll call this a create deal record. And so you can select a particular record and then enter in information from the rest of your kiosk flow to actually update or create a particular record in the system. But what you'll notice here, and this is kind of the challenge with the create record action, is that you can only really add things that are a subset of your flow. And so it becomes a little bit more limited when you get into trying to use any logic or any control statements. So as a rule of thumb, it's a good habit as you're getting more advanced in the system to get familiar with functions. So I'm going to walk you through how to set one of those up. So that you'll be able to use it when you go ahead and actually create a kiosk of your very own. So what I'll do here is just give this thing a quick name and be right back with you. Alrighty, so I went ahead and named this the create deal for pipeline kiosk, and then we need to choose if it needs to execute for any particular record. Now, in this case, I'm going to have it execute for the contact that we selected. Now you might think, well, why not the account? The reason is that if I have a contact, I have an account. But if I have an account, I have multiple contacts, which can end up being an issue because you'll have to select one of them when you actually go to create a deal and link an individual contact to it. So I'm going to run this for the select your contact section. Then we can have it run a function. If you have some that are already created, you can reference those here, but we're going to write our own. Now, a function will need a name and a display name, so I'll go ahead and write those in now. And so I went ahead and just named this create deal for pipeline kiosk. Simple name, but it calls out that this is specifically used in the kiosk section. So now we'll create this function and get started. The first place we're always going to go when we are adding a new function is to this edit arguments button up here in the top left. And this is essentially where you're going to define all of the inputs that you need for this particular function to trigger. And so on the left, we'll give that input a name. So I'll call this contact ID. And on the right, I'll hit pound and start to select where we want to pull this from. So here, we're going to pull this from the kiosk. We're going to pull it from the select your contact section. And then we're going to pull in that contact ID. Now, you could go ahead and actually also map the account ID here. So if you went into add to pipeline, and you went to select your account, and then you add that account ID. I'm going to show you how to do this in a better way, so we're not going to do it that way here. Reason is, this is a quicker and easier way, but it is not as clean in the long run as you get into more complicated flows. So you want to make as many of these values referential as we can, and we don't want to hard code them like this. Now, that being said, there are some values that we are going to need to just manually add. So things like closing date, that's going to be something that was selected as part of our flow. So that's going to come from our pipeline. And then here, we'll actually pull that from the screen, enter your deal information. And then we'll pull in the estimated closing date. And so I'm going to go ahead and map the rest of the fields here from that screen. And then we'll jump into actually writing our function. Alrighty, so here we have completed adding all of our individual arguments here. And so now we'll be able to actually get into writing the flow. One thing I want to highlight, don't be lazy with your names of variables. It is a dangerous habit, right? You might call this C date, right, to shorten it, but then you've got a completion date, and so that becomes comp date. Just write them out a little longer than you need them. It will save you time later when you come back to look at this, just knowing exactly what all of these values mean. So now we've got our inputs selected. Let's go back to our deal and just make sure that we have a good understanding of everything that we're going to need to add to this deal. So at a bare minimum, we will need the name, we will need the account name, we'll need closing date. Stage looks like it's set to a default value here, so we'll enter it at that default stage, and then we'll map our discovery information as well. So the first thing that we'll need to do is get the account ID from our contact information. And so to do that, we're going to just write 2 simple lines of code, which I'll write here, and then we'll jump back in and I'll explain exactly what I did. Alrighty, and so here with these 2 lines of code, I have done 2 things. One, I used that contact ID that I added to the function to get the entire data set about that contact. And 2, I've added a section that from that contact, I'm getting the account name, which is a list or a map of the name and ID. And then from that, I am grabbing the ID. And so now I actually have pulled that account ID without having to manually enter it into the function. So from here, now that we've added or grabbed the value for the account ID, next thing that we'll need to do is determine what do we want to name this deal? Because again, that is the last thing that we're not feeding into the function manually, but we are going to need it. I'm going to go ahead and just write one more line here that's going to create a new deal name before we go ahead and actually create the deal. Alrighty, and so back here into the code editor, one thing I do want to highlight, I grabbed the wrong name here. So this should be contacts, not contacts. If you're following along step by step here, just make sure you update that and make sure you pull in the appropriate API name. Here we've got our account ID. I did add one more line just to get the account name as well. And then for deal name, I'm just going to create that as account name plus a dash plus service type. So that's just going to concatenate all of these values together into the final thing that I want to actually use to create the deal. Last thing we'll need to do is create a map and then use that map to actually create the deal. So to add a map to our function, we'll say deal map equals a map. And within that map, we can assign values to parameters that we'll use to actually create the record. And so where we go to figure out how we need to name each of these values before we insert them is in settings, and then APIs here in the bottom right, and then under our API names. And so here on this page, it's going to give you the API name of every module. Now, generally speaking, an API name is just going to be exactly the same as the module name, but with underscores instead of spaces. But don't trust that all the time, because if it was renamed, maybe you're working with a system that you didn't originally set up, things can be different, right? Because these API names are locked in the moment that a record or a module is created. That's where I would get like this contacts API name to use on line 1 of our function. We know that our API name for deal is going to be deals, but let's click in and see the names of each and every field. So the first one I'm going to add is going to be the deal name. And so we can see the deal name, the API name will be in this middle column, and that is deal underscore name. So to actually add that to our map, we'll say put deal name. So this is our parameter. And then the value that we want to add is this deal name variable. And then make sure we get our semicolons. Deluge loves it some semicolons. So all I'm going to do here for the rest of this is just map a bunch more of these fields. You don't need to see me type each and every one of those. So I'll go ahead and map it all out, and then we'll be right back. So now we've gone ahead here and set up all of the different fields that we're going to use to create a deal. Again, just with this one in quotes on the left being the field API name, and the one on the right being the value that we're going to insert into that field. One thing I do always like to highlight is the API names for things like contact name and account name will reference the name, but you don't put the name in the field. You have to put the ID in the field, which is why I grabbed that for the account here on line number 2. The last step that we'll need to take here as part of this function is to go ahead and create the deal. So I'm going to add one line to do that here, and then we will explain the whole thing start to finish. Alrighty, so I went ahead here and added the deal create line. This will go ahead and just essentially create a deal based on the information that we have in our map. Off screen, I did also make 2 small additions to our map. I went ahead and just set the stage just to make sure that that gets passed through. Sometimes default values can act a little bit funky when we actually go ahead and update them or create them with Deluge. And then I did come into our arguments and add one more argument here for user ID, just so that we can set the owner as whichever user is taking part in this flow, right? Just to make it a little bit easier. This function is now good to go. We will save that and move on to our next step. So the next step here, I want to show you how you can actually give the user a link to this deal upon completion of the kiosk flow. Right now, there is no ability to do like an open URL through here. So if you're watching this later and they've added that, that would be the most ideal method. But in our case, what we're going to do is go ahead and give them this option to confirm their new deal. So here we'll do a get records, and we'll do a get records for the deals module. So we'll get records from deals, and we'll have our conditions here where the account name from that deal should perfectly match the account name from our search. The contact name on that deal should also perfectly match from our search. So I'll just search for name here, make this a little easier. And then just to be safe, we're going to go ahead and map some of the additional fields just to make sure that the system can really easily choose the appropriate deal for that user so they can select it and get access immediately. All right, so we went ahead here and passed in the match for account name, contact name, closing date, required completion date, and service type. Again, down the line, you'll probably be able to use like responses from functions. We'll make a new video of how to streamline this process a little bit, but I do just want to show you exactly how to make this work best. I always like to do a multiple record search. Obviously, it's very unlikely that any deal is going to exactly perfectly match the info that we just entered, but it never hurts just to make sure. And then here we'll show the deal name as well as the created time, just to make sure that they select the one that was just created by this process. And so that will give them the opportunity to confirm that new deal. Then the last thing that we're going to need to do is just create a screen. Call this access your deal. And this will just be a text field that will say, here is the link to your new deal. And now I might be thinking, how are we going to get that link? It's easier than you might think. So here we can come in and just select any old deal and grab this URL, bring it back to our flow, enter it here, and then click this pound symbol. We'll get values from our kiosk. We'll get the value from our confirmation of the deal, and then we'll get that deal ID. And so that deal ID there will actually be able to make this link unique to the particular deal. Looks like that didn't save, so I'm going to go ahead and re-enter that, and then we'll jump right into our next step. All right, so after a quick refresh, it did go ahead and add. So this is what it will look like at the end, but not actually when you access it. It will pull that ID directly from the deal that we have just created and confirmed. So now that we've built out the structure of our flow, finding our accounts, contacts, creating a deal, and then selecting and confirming that deal that we've created, let's go ahead and actually add this to our homepage and do an end-to-end walkthrough and see exactly how this is going to work. So to do that, I'll click Publish here. We'll go ahead and click Proceed. I'll close out some of these windows that I don't need anymore. And we'll go over to our home page. Now we're going to add this to the home page. So we'll go to Customize. And we could do this on an existing, we could customize the manager's home. I'm going to create a new one here, and we'll call this our pipeline dashboard. Now here, of course, you could add a ton of different like charts and reports and things like that as well. We're just going to focus on the main thing we want, which is our pipeline addition kiosk here. We'll give this out to our roles, click Save, and then voila, we now have our pipeline dashboard. So this is one of the really cool things about Kiosk because you can actually add it just directly to a homepage. It doesn't need to run for one particular record. So with this added to our home screen, let us go ahead and just do a run through. So we'll go ahead and start by searching for our account. We'll select the one that's found. Now we'll select the appropriate contact from that account. Next, we'll need to enter in our deal information. So we'll just type this in here. Let's say they want to get done by July and this is going to be for a renovation. Now in the background, our deal has been created here. So I've added just a quick prompt. This is really just to give the system a little more time to create that deal in the background to choose the deal. So they'll click done. Here's our deal that we had actually just created as part of this flow. And then now we've got our link directly to that deal. So I can just grab this link, drop it right into my URL bar, and I have direct access to that deal that has just been created. So pretty smooth little flow. A lot of people might find this easier and faster than like searching for an account and going through the process there. Also really nice because you're able to just embed this directly on your homepage for easy access to this workflow without a user having to really dig into the system at all. A lot of the big use case of these kiosk implementations is to take the user out of more sections of the system, right? So you don't need to go to accounts, you don't need to find anything, you don't need to search, you just start here, walk through the process step by step, and the system will guide you along the way. So I think that will do it for our walkthrough here today. This one ended up being a little longer than I expected. Really do hope that this video has been useful for you. If it has, please be sure to like and subscribe down below, as that really does help us out. If you've got any feedback, questions, or video requests, please leave those in the comments section as well, as we love reading through each and every one of those. So with that, thanks again for watching, and we will see you next time.